Welcome, and thank you all for joining us today for an overview of ExecOnline's first ever summer program run. My name is Michael Griffin. I'm the Chief Enterprise Product Officer at ExecOnline. My team is responsible for the enterprise products and services that surround our programs. By way of brief introduction, I joined ExecOnline last year from CEB Corporate Leadership Council, CLC, where I was an executive director responsible for research, tools, and executive education. So I've had the pleasure of coming to work each day for the past few years and working with HR leaders like yourselves on the call today. I'm excited to be joined today by Homa Bahrami, top business school professor from UC Berkeley. Homa is a leading advisor to Silicon Valley firms and the faculty director for our newest program, Accelerating Change Readiness and Agility. And Homa is going to share some insights today about our newest program and how we should be thinking about change readiness and agility. Homa, thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Michael.
Great. Let's turn to the agenda. And we have a few folks that are new to ExecOnline on the call, so we'll start by introducing briefly ExecOnline, and then we'll provide an overview of the 3-week programs available this summer in July. Then we'll spend the bulk of our time today having a conversation with Homa about our program on accelerating change readiness and agility. I have a number of questions that I'll pose to Homa, but we'd love for all of you to participate as well. And you can do that throughout the call, either by using the chat functionality in your GoToWebinar control panel. We have a member of our team that's monitoring that, and we'll pass it along. You can also raise your hand. There's a hand icon in the GoToWebinar control panel as well if you'd like to be unmuted to ask a question. So encourage you throughout to pose questions. We'll also stop along the way as well. And we'll close with some key dates for enrollment for the summer programs and next steps. All right, great. Why don't we start by sharing a little bit more for folks who are new to ExecOnline about who we are. We were founded 4 years ago, and the basic idea was to take traditional executive development programs from top business schools, which traditionally offered on campus a week or two away from the office, and bring them online in both 3-week and 6-week virtual programs. A unique aspect of our programs is that executives work on real business projects that have real business impact without taking them away from the business. And the way we're doing that is through certificate programs from top 10 business schools. You see here at the bottom of the page some of the logos we work with, MIT, Columbia, Yale, IMD, and of course, Berkeley. We work with more than 70 organizations globally across industries, and we'll have more than 3,000 alumni of our programs at the end of our spring programs. We've designed these programs with input and guidance from HR leaders like yourselves, and they're really designed to address 3 development challenges that we hear from HR teams. First is expanding the reach of your programs. Our programs are scalable. They're designed to help support the growth of all leaders, not just the few at the top of the house or in narrow hyper programs, without sacrificing quality. Second, reinforcing HR's role as a strategic partner to the business by offering development that drives measurable business impact. So we built the programs to help you connect the dots for business leaders between development and business outcomes because they're applying what they're learning to real projects. And then finally, providing choice, flexibility, and control over program deployment. You can choose from a curated portfolio of programs with the same structure, design, and quality of experience. We want to make it as easy as possible for leading staffed HR and learning teams to use. All right, well, let's talk about the programs that we have on tap for this summer. And as I mentioned, this is our first summer program. We've done some custom programs in the past for large cohorts, but the first time we're having a open summer run. Traditionally, we run our programs 3 times a year in October, February, and May. One of the things that we've heard from executives is that summer can actually be a great time of year for development. In many businesses, many roles, it can be a somewhat slower time of the year. Never completely slow for the executives that we work with, given this population, but relative to other times of the year, it can be easier to carve out 5 hours a week for a high-impact development experience. So the first first time we're offering three 3-week programs that run from July 18th to August 7th. And we picked the 3-week programs so that executives would finish in early August before the height of vacation season, so they can wrap up their programs and still take a holiday if they want in August. I'll give a quick overview of all 3 programs, and then we're obviously going to spend most of our time today on accelerating change readiness and agility, taking advantage of having our faculty director from that program on the line with us. But I'll give you a quick overview of our 2 Columbia programs as well, starting with embedding strategic excellence. And this is a course taught by Willie Peterson, and it's all about helping leaders align their teams around their strategy and creating a clear line of sight between what they're doing and the strategy. Willie, top professor at Columbia, very well known for his work on strategic learning, wealth of real-world perspective that he brings to the classroom. Before he joined Columbia, he was the CEO of Lever Foods, Seagram's, and Tropicana. In this program, leaders learn about the fundamentals of strategy creation as well as keys for successful execution. This program touches on a number of concepts that we teach in our 6-week program with Columbia, Leading Strategic Growth. And in fact, we've designed this so that you can send the teams of leaders who've gone through our 6-week strategy program through this to the extent there's an interest to provide a common language and set of tools. So a great program where strategy, execution, and alignment are key priorities. And then second, to the right, we have Building and Leading Effective Teams, also from Columbia. And this is all about helping leaders get more out of their teams. Great course taught by Bill Klepper. In this course, leaders learn how to show emotional and social intelligence, how to lead high-impact interactions with their teams, and how to lead with influence rather than authority. And then finally, our newest program, which we're going to spend the bulk of our time on today, is with Berkeley on accelerating change readiness and agility. And this is all about helping your leaders overcome resistance to change. Great faculty featuring Jenny Chapman, top-rated professor on an expert on culture and organizational performance, Joellen Posner, expert on organizational behavior, and of course, Homa Bahrami, who joins us today, is the faculty director for the program and a recognized thought leader on change readiness and agility and top professor at Berkeley. So let's shift gears now, and I want to bring Homa into the conversation. And what we want to do is talk about the why of change readiness and agility, but also the what, the how, and the who of the program. And again, as we're going through this, if you have questions, please feel free to use the chat functionality or the raise your hand button. So Homa, let's start by talking about the why of change readiness and agility. This has been one of our most popular new program launches. The topic is clearly resonating. I'm curious, why do you think this is important for leaders today?
It's a great question, and it's a question I get asked very often. And perhaps I can start, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Perhaps I can start off by giving you a little personal context of why I became interested in this topic, and then that leads us to why this topic is really resonating today. I came to Silicon Valley from the UK in the 1980s to go to Stanford Business School as a postdoc. At the time, I had looked at, for my PhD work, I had worked with 21 different European multinationals, companies like BP, Shell, Cadbury, Schweppes, Plessey, Dunlop. These were, at the time, the industrial giants of Europe. And I came to Silicon Valley and I really noticed I was on a different planet. At the time, Apple was about a few years old. Oracle had 60 employees. The first IT manager at Stanford Business School, who gave me my very first email account, went on to become the co-founder of Cisco. So this was a sort of transformational time in the Valley, and I realized that despite all the work I'd done with these 21 multinationals as part of my PhD work, it was like arriving on a different planet. And everything was different here. The pace of innovation, the pace of change, the way leaders behaved, the way companies were structured. And so that really made me particularly interested in the topic of change readiness, agility, and flexibility, because I wanted to understand what made these organizations in Silicon Valley different, and most important of all, what can others, more traditional industrial companies, learn from their experience? So I'm telling you this because I think it's important to the question that you asked. And 30 years later, fast forward, I think we're at a transformational time in business. Technology has really changed the way we operate. We have a new generation of millennials. We are a truly global, interconnected economy. Everything that happens in any part of the world has a direct impact on what is happening here, whether it's currency, whether it's geopolitical dynamics, whether it's government changes, whether it's the price of oil. So in a nutshell, I think change today is an everyday event and not a one-off situation. In the 80s, when I first started this work, people would say, well, what does Silicon Valley have to teach us? We operate in an industry that has very long life cycles. Change is a one-off event. It doesn't happen very rarely. So what do we have to learn? I think that situation has really changed today, and I think change is the name of the game for many businesses. I was talking to an executive team from a major airline that were visiting Silicon Valley, and this was the topic of conversation. I was talking to a group of executives from a pharmaceutical company, and we were talking about how they have to drive change, not just in response to, changes in healthcare legislation, but also the changing drug development scene and FDA regulations and a whole bunch of other stuff. So the why is about change today is an everyday occurrence. It's a constant. It's something that every leader, regardless of their position in the organization, in my view, has to be ready to address in a proactive rather than in a reactive way.
You talked about the Silicon Valley perspective, which I think is unique in terms of the view that brings to this course and the lessons that that other companies can take from that. I was wondering, can you talk a little bit more about what are some of those lessons that can be drawn outside of Silicon Valley from Silicon Valley?
Well, I think there are many, many lessons that we can draw. Let me just zoom in on three that may be of particular interest to our to those on the line. I think one is the attitude and the mindset towards change. Leaders who operate successfully in Silicon Valley companies where change is a constant view change as an opportunity rather than as a threat. They view it as a way to improve the business, to gain more market share, to become more efficient, to become more flexible and dynamic, rather than as a threat to the existing way of doing things. The second key component is the process they use for driving change. Everything in Silicon Valley companies is about exploration, experimentation, and iteration. It is not about big bang, one-time deal approaches. So the process side of the equation becomes really key. And then the third element of it is the whole set of issues around organizational readiness. How to engage the stakeholder community, how to bring people along, how to paint a picture of future success. So change is indeed viewed as an opportunity rather than as a threat. So I would say those are three key components that others can benefit from. One is the mindset, the other one is the process, and I think the third one is the whole issue of stakeholder engagement and community mobilization, so that you can indeed deal with resistance in a much more direct, proactive way and move things forward instead of taking too long to address the cynics and the skeptics who might delay the process. I would say those are the three core areas.
Great. Mindset, process, and the organizational lens. Very interesting. Now, you've made a distinction as the course is being pulled together between change readiness and change management. What's that distinction, and why is that important?
I think the distinction is simple to explain. I think change management is a phrase we use in a historic context. It's been around for a very long time, since the 60s, 70s. And in my view, it really refers to periodic one-off changes. So you go through a major reorganization every few years. You need to get the organization ready for it. You go through a major, huge product launch. You need to get the organization ready for it. You merge or acquire another company, and you need to integrate them into your system. So historically, the phrase change management, at least as I understand it, has been used to discuss periodic, one-off, big bang changes. Change readiness is more about dealing with change as a constant rather than as a one-off. And that's where I think Silicon Valley has some lessons that others can benefit from, because in this ecosystem, change is indeed a constant. And you have to build your leadership muscles around change readiness because you have to be ready every day. So one day a change may be more dramatic than another day, but you have to deal with it every day. A new team member joins you, a critical expert leaves you, competition comes out with something you didn't expect, 2 major customers leave you, some new legislation comes about that really redefines your landscape. There is currency turmoils, there may be geopolitical impacts in some of your key markets. So that would be the way I would describe the difference. Change readiness is about change as a constant, and change management is more about change as a periodic one-off.
Great. Well, we covered a lot of ground already. Let me pause here and see if there's any questions. I think it looks like we have Liz from Adobe has raised her hand. Can we unmute Liz to ask a question?
Hello, Liz.
I would ask, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Just from the standpoint of the takeaways for this program and how applicable it is, could you share, really interested in how we could direct some individuals in, because certainly change is a constant, and would just love if there's a chance during the conversation to hear what are some of the key takeaways or how that it could be applied immediately.
Great. Thank you for that great question. So one of the biggest things that gets in the way, in my experience, and I've had the distinct privilege of working with many different entrepreneurs, business leaders, innovators, change drivers, the one thing that I think all of the successful ones have in common, they have a clear change playbook. And secondly, they understand their own personal approach to change. So those are two things that I've seen really great change drivers have in common. And then the third one I would add to it, they're really effective in dissecting and segmenting their stakeholder community to see who's a resistor, who's a late adopter, who's a champion, who's an early adopter, who can I bring on board sooner rather than later. So those are the three key components of what I've seen in very successful change drivers. Now, given that, that's how exactly we've designed the course. So the course has been designed on those three success criteria, and that brings me, Liz, to your question about what are the key takeaways. So the first module is about you as a change driver. Who are you, and what is your adaptive DNA? What is your natural, your instinctive approach to change? Are you one of these people who's always looking for more information, tends to be more perfectionist, want to have all the information before you engage in action? Do you happen to be somebody who is a great visionary? You have a clear vision of what this change looks like, where it's going to lead to? You're persistent? Do you tend to be a cheetah, really fast on your feet, and you can't wait to get things started, and sometimes you might break a few glasses here and there? So the first module is really built around the self-awareness of a change driver and a leader. So who are you, and what is your adaptive DNA? And the participants will take an online survey, and they will get their survey results based on 5 very distinctive attributes of what we call adaptive DNA, which is a leader's natural aptitude and approach towards change. The second module is more about your stakeholder community and your context and your culture. So this module enables you, and my colleagues Jenny Chapman and Jo Allen Posner that Michael referred to, they will be joining me in this module, because here what we have to understand is, what are your cultural barriers? What are your cultural enablers? How do you segment your stakeholder community? How do you engage with your early adopters? So the second module is not about you, but it's about your context, your world, your organization, your team, your culture, and your context. And then the third module is about your execution playbook. Okay, now that I've understood myself and I know what my own strengths and limitations are with regard to change, I understand what my cultural barriers and enablers are and how I can segment and engage my stakeholder community. So what next? And the playbook really, Liz, tries to bring everything together and, if you like, give the leaders a really simple, succinct, comprehensive checklist, so that as they go through the change process, they can really consider all the key elements in a fairly simple, straightforward recipe. Because, what I have found is leaders who do this well, just like great sports coaches, have a playbook, and they don't, they don't dither here and there, and they just go forward, they learn from their experience, but they have that clarity of what it is that they have to do. So those are the 3 key elements of what I would say are the key takeaways. Know yourself and your aptitude towards change. Know your organization and dissect your stakeholders and learn how to engage and bring them on board. And 3, have a very clear execution playbook that can help you drive change on a comprehensive, consistent, systematic basis. I don't know if that answered your question, perfect. Liz.
Absolutely, it did. We're always looking for things that are applicable. The frame of self and then stakeholders and then the playbook is really powerful, and I could see how it would benefit leaders who could be participating in your program.
Thanks for asking the question, Liz.
Thanks, Liz, for raising your hand. It was a great question. We actually got another question at the same time via chat from Pamela that touched on some similar themes. So trying to understand what are some of the concepts that are taught in the course. And I wonder if we could maybe take a double click on some of the models and concepts that are taught in the 3 areas that you mentioned. You mentioned adaptive DNA. Can you talk a little bit more about what is adaptive DNA and how is it taught?
So adaptive DNA is a phrase that my colleague Stuart Evans, who's at Carnegie Mellon's Silicon Valley campus, and I have coined, and it's basically a term that describes the different facets of what we call super flexibility. And super flexibility is another terminology that we developed based on the experience of successful companies, teams, and entrepreneurs here in Silicon Valley. It's we define super flexibility as the ability to withstand change and stay the course and be consistent on the one hand, and the ability to transform, reinvent, adapt on the other hand. So super flexibility is this constant balancing act. So within the frame of super flexibility, we then zoom in on the specific a profile of different change agents and change drivers. And if you look at the literature as well as field research, there are 5 key concepts that constitute the adaptive DNA spectrum. Some of these are more about withstanding change and staying the course and being consistent and stable. Some of these are more about reinvention, adaptation, and sort of really transformation. So the 5 are robustness, resilience, hedging, versatility, and agility. So robustness is what you associate with great visionaries. If you look at, people who are very well known in Silicon Valley, the Steve Jobses, the Larry Ellisons, the great visionaries and entrepreneurs, they have a clear vision of future success, what the world will look like, and they are relentless and persistent in driving towards it. We use the image of a crocodile to describe this particular DNA. So if you think of a crocodile, it is patient, it is persistent, it knows what it wants to catch its prey, and it is relentless in driving towards it. So that is the first DNA, what we call the robust DNA. The resilient DNA is about the ability to fix things once they go wrong. It's the ability to bounce back from setbacks. It is a very significant attribute of very successful change drivers. As one entrepreneur said, it's not a question of how many times you fall, it's a question of how many times you get up. And so resilient DNA is the image of the starfish. So if you think of the starfish, once you chop off one of its arms, it regrows another one. And this is what we call the fixer DNA. The third DNA is the hedging DNA. Hedging is, of course, a concept you see a lot in financial planning, portfolio management, and if you translate that to the change readiness and flexibility literature, it's about those who are great planners. These are people who are anticipating what-if scenarios. What if this happens? What if that happens? What is our plan A? What is our plan B? And again, the image we use here, just to simplify the construct, is the image of a camel. If you think of a camel, it knows it's going to go in the desert, it's going to run out of water, so it makes sure it has water in its humps, just in case. The fourth one is the cheetah. This is the agility DNA, is the agile DNA, and those with an agile DNA are great at 2 things. One is they are minimalist in their approach rather than perfectionists. So they tend to think about what are the must-haves rather than would be nice to have. And secondly, they tend to be very good at spring cleaning. If they take on 3 extra tasks, they make sure they put a couple of current tasks on the back burner. So that is the 4th DNA. And then the 5th DNA, which is the versatile DNA, we exemplify with the image of a chameleon. And those who are versatile, like great salespeople, for example, they have fantastic senses. They're really good walking into a room, in a situation, and picking up signals and figuring out what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And those with a versatile DNA are really very good at switching gears, adapting their communication style, their interaction style, and, as I said, connecting the dots and picking up signals very readily. So those are the 5 different adaptive DNAs, and this forms the basis of our online survey that we do in Module 1. So our leaders who take the course can get some insights into themselves. Who are they as, because if I happen to be a camel, for example, a great planner, I want to have somebody on my change team or helping me out who's got some of the other qualities. So this gives leaders insights that they can leverage their strengths and sort of augment, complement the areas they're not as strong in with others on their team. So that is the first module. The second module on culture Jenny Chapman, my colleague, talks about some of the, what is culture and what are the attributes of cultures we look at. Culture is a recipe for success. Culture is a sense of right and wrong. Culture is about the rituals that have exemplified the history of an organization and the stories people tell. And then Jo Ellen talks about a simple framework for stakeholder segmentation. How can we sort of dissect the organizational community into your early adopters and your champions, your early majority, your late majority, your laggards, and, if you like, your resistors. And I think the participants basically have an opportunity to go through that exercise and apply that framework to their own organization and stakeholder context. And then the third one is about the playbook. And in the playbook, we basically leverage two different models. One is a process model for driving change. Again, we have published extensively on this topic. It's really more the scientific process and the experimentation iteration process with three distinct stages of experimentation, escalation, and then launch or integration. And there are different qualities associated with each stage. And then we bring it all together with the playbook. And the playbook is really, if you like, sort of a comprehensive checklist. The way we designed the playbook is I wanted to make sure that if somebody just needed one sheet of paper and say, I don't have time to go through all these slides and remember all this stuff, just give me one thing, one page that I can stick on my whiteboard and I can look at every day and remind myself. That's how we put the playbook together, with that ease of use and keep it simple in mind. So I hope that's given everybody enough of some of the kind of content behind the different modules that we have in this course.
Great, thanks for the deep dive there. Let me pause and see if there are any additional questions on the content, the key concepts that are taught. We talked a little bit about the structure of the course already, and all of our courses are structured in a similar way. One of, I think, the unique attributes is that executives are working on real business challenges. I wonder, can you talk a little bit about how do we bake that piece into this course?
Sorry, say that again. You went out for a moment, Michael. Could you please repeat that?
So one of the things that's unique about the structure of our programs is that executives work on real business challenges. They're applying what they're learning to real. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how we incorporate that in this particular program.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And, one of the fundamental, two things to say to that. One is, as a prelude, one is that, as we know, people learn much better by doing, and especially applying the course content to something that's near and dear to their heart and something that they are currently grappling with. And the second key idea is to make it bite-sized, so every week they go through a particular module over a 3-week time frame so that they have the opportunity to digest, reflect, and basically make the content manageable. So with those sort of preludes, I would say that the best advantage of applying it as you go through is by the end of it, you have a tangible deliverable. There is nothing better than something that you're already working on that you can apply the framework to. The analogy I use is I say, we give you the coat hangers and the participants have the clothes. Mm-hmm. And we hope together we can create something that's both meaningful, organized, and systematic. The frameworks, the examples give the participants food for thought, and then in their groups, they have the opportunity to apply, to reflect, to discuss, to share, to cross-pollinate, so that by the end of the 3 weeks, they can come up with something very concrete and very tangible. In my world in Silicon Valley, this is the only way things work. It's learning by doing, and people are always in a hurry, and there is a sense of urgency. And so I think this model is something that we have worked on a lot, and in my own personal judgment, it is the only way to make a concept like this stick. Otherwise, people come, they sit in a classroom, they learn about the ideas, and then they walk away, and then they face their daily routines and the avalanche of emails and tasks and things they have to do. So it's not as sticky. So that's what I really like about the design of this course, is that we really combine the learning with the doing and the sharing and the reflecting. And collectively, I hope that gives our participants both an enjoyable learning experience as well as something very hands-on, practical, tangible, impactful that they can walk away with.
Great. We've got a question from Anne-Marie, and that's, have you had a team do this course and work on a group project, and what was the impact? And maybe I'll just sort of preface this by saying that we do have some of our clients who send intact teams through our programs. In general, typically that's not the most common use case, but we do see that in some of our programs. Homa, there's anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, first of all, I think it's a great question, and it is definitely worthwhile. I would say if you can send at least 2 people from a team that can take the course together, it definitely makes a difference, at least 2. The reason is really simple. You have a buddy who is sharing your experience, so you have a sounding board, you have a peer coach, you have a support system. And that makes it so much easier to actually implement whatever you develop as a result of the course. Obviously, if you can send an intact team, that is fantastic. That is the ideal scenario. And again, it's to do with having a support system, a sounding board, peer coaching, and people who are really have different reflections on different parts of the organization. So for example, when you're reflecting on your culture and your context in Module 2, or you're trying to analyze your stakeholder community, it is so much more powerful if it's more than just you. If you have a colleague who might bring in a diverse perspective, or who might have a different angle, different point of view on the stakeholders or the culture, I just think it makes the whole experience much more A, enjoyable, and B, sticky in terms of impact. So thank you for asking that question. It's definitely worthwhile. And I know it's not easy to send an entire intact team. People are busy. But as I said, if you can have at least a pair from the same team, that really makes a big difference.
That's a great point. In fact, one of the things I'm going to pull up is our structure of the programs, because regardless of whether there's an intact team or not, the pure learning aspect of the program is really vital to the learning experience. And so for folks for whom this might be new, the image on the right gives a sense for how executives go through the programs in groups. So a typical program is going to have about 300 executives. That's the outer quadrant of the square. Then we'll have a professor section, and so this will be a plenary session run by Homa in this case, 50 to 60 executives. But then we'll have what we're called here enterprise forums, so smaller groups of 24 to 32 executives with 8-person team breakouts. And this is where a lot of the application is going to happen, where they're going to talk about their specific situation, their company-specific situation. And so having those teams, even if it's not an intact team, is absolutely a critical piece of the experience. And then we do, of course, as well, team each participant up with a buddy. Great question. I've got another question here from Jean. Do you use any specific models like bridges or ADKAR?
The models that we use, we summarize that. Those specific ones, no, but we do, in each of the modules, we do a summary of the sort of broader literature. The models are, our own models. So we're not sort of basing the course on anybody else's model, but we do in the interest of summarizing the literature, particularly in modules 2 and 3, we summarize the sort of change literature broadly defined. But we do have our own models, and as I said, those are explained in each of the specific modules.
Great, and I think we touched on some of the big ones: the adaptive DNA, the segmentation, the adoption S curve. Those are some of the key models that.
And also the scientific model, which is in module 3. This is a process model for driving change in highly dynamic companies, and we basically talk about the different stages of that model. But to the question, we do summarize the literature, and what we try to do is give the audience a sort of a overview of, a synthesized overview of the literature broadly defined, and then we delve into the specific models that we have developed based on our own research.
Great. Well, I think we've covered the why. We've covered the what in terms of what's in the course in some detail. We also talked a little bit about the how in terms of how the course is structured, in terms of how real-world experiences are baked in, also how the teams function and how that's a critical part of the experience. Let's close the conversation with the who. So all of our programs are targeted towards leaders, VP, senior directors, senior managers. Our sweet spot is really 2 to 4 levels below the CEO. And this program is no exception to that. We, as you know, we have a number of HR leaders on the line who are responsible for selecting leaders for this program in the broader business, but some of whom may also be evaluating the program for HR leaders on their own team. And I'm curious, could you talk a little bit about how might HR leaders leverage this in their own function?
I think that's a great question. I absolutely love the idea of HR leaders also taking part in the course and then viewing themselves as the advisors, the mentors, the guides for the broader community that they support inside their organization. So I think it's absolutely a good idea if you're an HR leader and this is an area of great interest to you and you find that your organization is going through a lot of changes and change readiness is something that you want to really build in the fabric of your organization. I think you should view yourselves as I said, mentors, advisors, trainers to the broader community. And actually sometimes it may even be helpful for the HR leaders to take this course together with some of their other colleagues in line management, because then you have a shared experience, you have a shared vocabulary, and I think you can sort of, be each other's support system. So whether you take it individually and then you want to mentor and help those you support, or whether you want to do it together with them, I definitely think it's an excellent idea. There is no reason why you can't see yourselves as basically the teachers, the mentors, the helpers in this process, because in some cases your leaders themselves may be very busy, or they may say, look, I'm going to take this course, but I would love to have somebody else join me. I think it's an excellent idea, and I would strongly encourage you to consider that.
Great. Well, pulling up a bit from the program itself, how in your own work are you leveraging this content?
This content is, I sit on a couple of public technology boards. I sit on a couple of private boards. I'm an advisor to several companies. I have quite a few executive education programs that we do with different companies. So I use this material in very, very different ways depending on the context and the work. So the other day I was advising COO of a big life science company here that is going through some big challenges. Their product is delayed and, they're having some market challenges. So I basically use the adaptive DNA to talk about the composition of the team of this COO who is driving this sort of change inside the organization, trying to make them more agile, more robust, more flexible. And, we discovered that he has got a lot of camels on his team. He's got a lot of planners, so they are having a really tough time deciding. and they're always waiting to gather more and more information. So that is one really simple example that comes to my mind. It was just a couple of days ago. So we were talking about how he can leverage those team members or coach them, or address some of the challenges that too many planners on the team is kind of bringing about. I also use it when we talk about, a lot of, at the board level, when we do acquisitions, for example, and we're talking about acquisition integration. It comes in really handy because, you're driving change constantly, whether it's around people, processes, technologies, products, sales forces, etc. That is another area I have actively used it. The other day, I was in one of these hyper-growth Silicon Valley companies that is, I was talking to the CTO organization, Chief Technology Officer organization, and they are reaching a size where their old practices no longer work. So we were talking about how best they can, reinvent themselves, keeping the best elements of the old and moving themselves forward towards the new. So it is, it just depends on the week and the day and the context. And of course, in my own executive programs, and we do at Berkeley Center for Executive Education, we do executive programs with a variety of different companies, both here in Silicon Valley as well as in other parts of the world. And I use this content in a much more sort of orderly, systematic way, so that we get a group of 50 people come to the program. For example, they may be their high potentials, they may be their general managers, and these people are driving many different changes. So we use that inside our executive programs too. So it just depends. It depends on the context, but those give you a little flavor of some of the tangible areas that I can think of just during the past month or so.
Absolutely. Great examples. And well, I want to manage us to a close on the hour. So I'm going to, let's stop here and see if there's any final questions for Homa. And well, let me just thank you. This has been incredibly helpful. I know I've learned a lot, and I'm sure folks in the line have as well. Let me see if there's any last questions from the audience before we close with dates. So a question from Anne-Marie. Has there been any challenge in showing the immediate impact of this course when it's only 3 weeks? Do you have some immediate success, feedback, testimonials? Great question. I think one of the things that we do is really look at all 5 phases of impact. So we're looking at the satisfaction immediately after the program. And it's very high. And in fact, these are some of the best scores we've ever had for an inaugural program in the winter, as well as the intent to apply. But to your point, the immediacy of the impact is hard to do right at the end of the program. So one of the things that we do for all of our programs is check in at 6 and 12 months, and we'll be doing that for this program as well, again, to look at the application. And then also to look at the impact of the projects themselves. We found that this is obviously a very conservative way to measure the impact of the programs, to the extent that clearly they're applying what they've learned in a lot of different contexts, not just on the project, but it is a very concrete thing that we can look at and measure. And so at the end of the program, we're asking, we're talking to the alumni to understand the projected impact, but then going back in 6 and 12 months to see have they applied their personal case, and then was there measurable business impact coming out of it. That's a little bit of the framework. The preliminary satisfaction and application scores have been quite high, and we'd be happy to share that with anyone on the call. We also look at changes in competencies as well. So we ask the participants at the beginning of the program to self-assess on a number of key competencies related to, in this case, change readiness and agility, and then we ask them at the end of the course as well, and we see significant changes. But from a business impact perspective, we're really looking at those projects that they take forward, those change challenges that they're working on in this case. Great question. Homa, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I think that just to add to that, I totally agree with your view. And in my own programs as well, the ones we do on site, I find that I do these impact assessments. We generally do them 6 weeks, 3 months, and 6 months after the completion of the program. because the proof of the pudding is in the eating of it. In other words, when they go back and they implement and they practice these skills, it's through the repetitive practice that these become sort of leadership muscles. So I think it's really important not just to assess this just at the completion time, per your point, Michael, but to really look at it over a broader time frame. And that's exactly what we do as well in our own programs.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'll do in follow-up to this call is I'll share some of the testimonials we do have, because we have fantastic feedback. Again, it's not the 6 and 12 month, of course, because we just started this in winter, but in terms of just the testimonials from the executives themselves, we can share that for folks, so you can take a look at them. Great question. Let me close this out by sharing some dates for folks who are interested in sending some of their executives through our summer programs. Again, all three programs that we talked about, Accelerating Change Readiness and Agility, as well as Embedding Strategic Excellence, and our management program, begin on July 18th, and they run for 3 weeks to August 7th. The registration deadline, which is one I really want to call attention to, is June 24th. We have this deadline because we want to give the executive participants time to go through the technology check process and schedule their team interactions before the program starts, so that we're setting them up for success. We want to give them enough time to do that. But once executives are registered, they're invited to the welcome module starting June 1st, and that's where they get a program overview, they do the tech check, we schedule team meetings, again, once a week, and they can select a welcome webinar. And then starting on July 8th, the orientation module opens, and that's where they go through introductory videos, review the meeting times, and complete pre-work for the program, which kicks off on July 18th.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Homa.